Hello, everybody. Adam Bergman here, tax attorney, founder of IRA Financial. On today's video, we got breaking news. The IRS extends again, require minimum distribution relief for designated beneficiaries throughout 2024. And they did this in 23 and 22. And of course, COVID, they also extended relief for requirement of distributions in 2020 and 2021. So for certain designated beneficiaries, those folks have not had to have taken requirement of distributions for the last 4 years. And this video will give you everything you need to know about the RMD rules. The RMD rules are super complicated. They don't have to be. It just seems the IRS wants to make them that way for some reason. And they're so complicated that the IRS can't even figure them out and can't even issue final regulations. So they have to keep kicking the can down the road and giving us all relief because they can't actually agree on how they are going to work. So I'm going to go through the rules and explain literally how the RMD rules work. If you died before 2020, if you died after 2020, if you are what's called an eligible designated beneficiary, if you're just a designated beneficiary, how many years do you have to take your money out of your IRA or 401k? Now, again, this relief is only for designated beneficiaries. It's only for folks that are part of the 10-year system. If, for example, you're a beneficiary for someone who's passed away prior to 2020, or maybe you're an eligible designated beneficiary and you're using the lifetime schedule, then the relief does not apply to you. You still technically have to take RMDs. This relief, meaning you do not have to take RMDs in 24 for 23, only applies if you are a designated beneficiary and are part of the 10-year rule. Okay, I'm going to explain what the controversy is and what's going on with all this. So I'm going to do my best to simplify the RMD rules. And that's what I've done with this PowerPoint. I'm going to break it down for you per category so I could make it as super easy as possible, because they are kind of a frustratingly confusing set of rules. So just some info about me. You guys know who I am, Adam Bergman, founded IRA Financial. I've written 8 books on self-directed retirement accounts, tax lawyer, I have a master's in taxation. And I don't know if it's a great thing to say, but I know this stuff pretty well. Maybe I should have been a software engineer or a doctor, but I chose law and I chose to focus on tax law specific to retirement accounts. So this is what I enjoy doing. I hope to have the opportunity to educate all of you to explain all the benefits of the retirement system, including how the distribution rules work. And I know it's not a sexy topic. I know this is not something where people are going to just be like, oh my God, I can't wait to watch a video on RMDs. But guess what? As you get older, once you hit the required minimum distribution age of 73, you have a traditional IRA, 401k, you're going to need to know how these rules work. So you might as well just watch this video and give me another 15, 20 minutes. I'll teach you everything you need to know. So the breaking news, they're extending the relief. This is a notice 24-35. As I mentioned, they did this in previous years as well. And then we had to deal with COVID. What does this notice say? It basically is giving people relief who are part of the designated beneficiary group, folks that have had to take or supposedly had to take RMDs over a 10-year period. Here's the controversy in a nutshell. The IRS still, in 4 years, cannot figure out, should you have to take out a little bit each year until you get to year 10 to deplete it, or does the taxpayer have the right to wait until year 10 to deplete it all? Right? The whole idea of requirement distributions is you've had the benefit of an IRA or 401k, you got the tax deduction, you got the benefit of tax deferral. The IRS is saying, okay, the gravy train's running out. It's time to give back some of that money to Uncle Sam in tax revenue form so we can then use some of those benefits to, pay for a military and infrastructure and all that great stuff. So the idea is about 3% a year if you use a lifetime expectancy table. But obviously, if you shorten that over 10 years, you're going to have to take out bigger distributions every year. And that's what the IRS wants, because they're going to get back the tax money much quicker over 10 years than they would over maybe 20, 30, or 40-year life expectancy based off the old rules. And they changed this in Secure Act 1 that was passed in 2019 because they needed to pay for other programs. So they basically said, okay, let's shorten the RMD rules. We're going to create more tax revenue so we can do some other really good stuff like reducing taxes and some other stuff the government at that time wanted to do. So it's not that hard, right? All they need to do is decide, hey, do you have 10 years to pull the money out, which would just be easier? Just say every taxpayer, every American, hey, if you're a designated beneficiary, and we'll get to what that means, you're not what's considered an eligible designated beneficiary or an EDB, then you got 10 years, and basically after year 10, you have to have zero left in your IRA or 401k. It's pretty simple. I can write those rules in like half a page. The IRS has been like literally praying over this stuff for 5 years. And even the last 3 years, they keep issuing these notices, basically kicking the can down the road again, saying we don't want to deal with this stuff now. We'll worry about it next year. So people get the satisfaction of not having to take an RMD, but ultimately they're going to have to take it within the 10-year period. You can still do an RMD. You don't have to not, right? But at least these relief is saying you don't have to, but you could if you wanted. So I don't know how hard it is, again, just to say, okay, is it a little bit every year or is it after year 10? Or it has to be zero. I would just say you have 10 years, use what you need. After year 10, your IRA 401k balance has to be zero, and that's the rule. Again, I can do this in a half page. Not that I'm some super duper tax lawyer. It's just not that difficult. So as I mentioned, this stuff's been going on since 2020. Is anyone home IRS? I don't know. I don't know what's going on over there. They say they're going to have something soon after January 1, 2025. They've been saying this for 4 years. So not sure what they're going for here, but it's the government. That's why I am a firm believer that the less the government does, the better we are all. So this is what happened in prior guidance. They basically, as I mentioned, for the last 4 years, you haven't had to take RMDs, COVID, and then they've been giving us all this relief because they can't figure out this 10-year rule for designated beneficiaries. Okay, and here's this 10-year rule. Secure Act 1.0 created this 10-year rule. For anyone that's a designated beneficiary, you basically have 10 years to pull the money out. The question and the controversy is, do you do it a little bit pro rata every year over 10 years, or can you wait until year 10 to pull it all out? That's the controversy. It doesn't seem that complicated to me. That's where we are. So this is the 10-year rules. So designated IRA beneficiaries. So if an IRA owner died after the Secure Act, so in 2020, 21, 22, or 23, and they died after the required beginning date, which in 23 is 72, and then in 2021, 22 is 72, then you basically have 10 years, right? You're not going to be able to use the life expectancy, and you have to use 10 years. Okay, so, and I'll go through all this, but this is what this relief is going after. Remember, it's only for designated beneficiaries that are not using life expectancy, and they're giving you this reprieve because they can't figure out the 10-year. The other group of people it's going to help is if you are an eligible designated beneficiary, which I'll talk about in a second, and you die, the person that is the beneficiary of the EDB. So if I am, let's say, a person that's not more than 10 years younger than the deceased, so that means I'm an eligible designated beneficiary. Let's say my brother passes away, God forbid, and I'm 5 years younger, I become an EDB, so I can then use life expectancy, which is longer, or I can do the 10-year. Now then, if I die as the beneficiary that is an EDB, my beneficiaries would have to use the 10 years. So these two groups of people, the designated beneficiary and the beneficiary of an EDB, you can basically not take RMDs if you don't want to in 2024. That's what the relief is for, these two groups of people. Okay, so let's now break down these RMD rules. Now that you understand that if you're a designated beneficiary or a beneficiary of someone that was an EDB, an eligible designated beneficiary, and are stuck using the 10-year rule because they can't figure out if you're supposed to take it out over all years pro rata, or you can wait to the end, they don't want to make a decision. So they're just saying, I don't know, we can't figure this out. Yeah, we have two choices, not that hard, right? Flip a coin. We'll keep going and giving you more relief. Whatever, super stupid. Okay, what's the required beginning date, RBD? This is the date you have to start taking requirement minimum distributions. The date changes. It was 72, now it's 73. starting in 23. And basically, you have until April 1 of the year after to start taking required minimum distributions. So the RBD is important because if your required beginning date was after 2020, depending if you're an eligible designated beneficiary or not, that will determine if you're subject to the 10-year or the life expectancy. So the two important terms to know are RBD, required beginning date, which is either 73 years old in 2024. It was 72 in prior years, 2020, 21, 22. It used to be 70 and a half before 2020. Okay, that's just the RBD. This is another very, very key point, the EDB, the eligible designated beneficiary. An EDB is different than a DB. A designated beneficiary is someone who's not an EDB, okay? And we'll see who those people are. So an EDB, and you want to be an EDB. Why? Because you have the choice to do 10 years or life expectancy, which will let you stretch it out over a longer period of time. Okay, and you always want to stretch because that means you have to take less amount each year, which means the money can grow faster in the IRA based off the power of deferral. So EDBs are good. If you're not an EDB, you're just stuck on the 10-year. Okay, so who's an EDB? A spouse, right? If you're a spouse, you can move the IRA in your name and you don't have to take an RMD. Now, if you're under 73. If you're over 73, then if it's you, then you will decide what the right method of our RMD is. So if someone passes away and it's your spouse, okay, then you're an EDB. Or if the beneficiary is a minor child, that minor child is an EDB. Or they're disabled or chronically ill, right? These are the beneficiaries. So if person X passes, their beneficiary, if they're a spouse or a minor child, they're an EDB. If they're a disabled or chronically ill individual, they're an EDB. If they're an individual who is not more than 10 years younger, which is 10 years or less, which is who writes this, right? Like only lawyers and government officials write this. Not more than 10 years younger. You would think there's an easier way of saying just 10 years younger, right? Less than 10 years younger. So if you're 6 years younger, 5 years younger, 8 years younger, you just can't be more than 10 years younger. So you can't be 15 years younger. So if someone dies who's 70 and you're 62, you're an EDB, right? Because you're not more than 10 years younger. If you're 42 and they're 70, then you're not an EDB because you're 10 years younger, although assuming you're not disabled or chronically ill, you're not the spouse or minor child. So if you aren't an EDB, then you're a DB, designated beneficiary, like you're, God forbid your brother passes away and you're 20 years or not, you're 12 years younger than your brother, or your grandma passes, right? And you're obviously 10 years younger, more than 10 years younger, right? So you're 15, 20 years younger than your grandma, then you are not an EDB. But if you're only 5 years younger than the person that died, you can be an EDB. And what an EDB does is it lets you choose between 10 years and the life expectancy, which is a longer stretch of time. Could be 20 or 30 years, right? Which means less money each year. Okay, so that's why RBD is important, right? Required beginning date. That's when you have to start taking the required minimum distributions. Now 73 years old. And then the EDB is even more important. Are you an eligible designated beneficiary? If you're an EDB, you can stretch or use the 10-year. Who's an EDB? Spouse of the deceased, a minor child of the deceased, a disabled or chronically ill individual beneficiary of the deceased, or someone of the deceased who's not more than 10 years younger. So 8 years younger, 2 years younger, right? 1 year younger. If you're not an EDB, you are a designated beneficiary. Okay, so let's go through all the rules. I'm going to break this down when people die, when the person died, because there's different rules if you died before 2020 or after 2020, thanks to the Secure Act. So these are the old rules. If someone dies before 2020 and you're a spouse, the spouse is the beneficiary, okay? Then the spouse could put the IRA in their own name, or they can use the life expectancy, or they can use the 5-year. No one would really use 5 years because why limit yourself, right? Just do life expectancy and take out more than you want. And that's essentially what it used to be. It used to be before the Secure Act, someone died before 2020, you would take the money over your life expectancy. And that was how the rules work. And that's why the relief for the RMD does not apply to these folks, because they're not in the 10-year regime, right? They're in the life expectancy regime. Okay, let's go to someone who died before 2020, but the beneficiary is a non-spouse, like a brother or sister, okay? So if someone died before 2020, the beneficiaries can take it over their life expectancy, or they follow the 5-year rule, right? The 10-year rule does not apply to these people because the rule did not come into play until after 2020. So if you died before 2020, the 10-year rule is not a regime you would follow. It doesn't exist. You're dealing with 5 years or life expectancy, which was the rule. Okay, now let's get into the new rules. So, and I changed the color. So if someone dies after 2020, okay, and you're a spouse, you can keep it in your own name. You could do the 10 years. Okay, that's basically what you would do, right? So or you can do the life expectancy, right? Because if you are the spouse, now you're in the 10-year regime after 2020, you're an EDB. You're an eligible designated beneficiary because you're the spouse of the person that died. So then you have the choice. You can do 10 years or life expectancy, right? And then generally what people do is if your spouse passes, you're going to put the IRA in your name, and then it's based off your age, okay? And then if you are over, 73 years old, you'll take distributions. You can do life expectancy. You can do 10 years. It's up to you, right? Because you're the spouse. And we'll get to in a minute what the 10-year rule does, but the spouse is an EDB. Now, what happens if it's a non-spouse? Then you have to figure out, is that non-spouse an EDB? If they're an EDB, meaning they're not more than 10 years younger, they're the spouse, or they're chronically ill or disabled, then as an EDB, you could choose 10 years life expectancy. If you're not an EDB, just a regular old beneficiary, meaning you're more than 10 years younger than the person, okay? You're 20, 30 years, it's a grandma, let's say, an aunt, uncle, you're stuck in 10 years, okay? You're not a spouse, and you're not more than 10 years younger, right? You're the grandchild, the nephew, the niece, those are the more common children. You're in the 10-year window, okay? You don't get the life expectancy option. You're in the 10-year window. Okay, so that's why it's so important to understand how the EDB rules work. They're super, super important. Because if you're not an EDB, it's easy. It's 10 years. If you are an EDB after 2020, someone passes. If you're a spouse, you're an EDB. And then you have the choice, life expectancy or 10 years. If you're not a spouse, then are you an EDB? Well, if you're not more than 10 years younger, okay, 8 years younger, you're an EDB. Or God forbid you're chronically ill or disabled or a minor child, then you have the choice, 10 years or life expectancy. If you are not an EDB, meaning you're a designated beneficiary, you have to follow the 10 years. Okay, that's the important thing. And if you're not an individual, you follow the 5-year trust rules. So let's put it all together, right? It's all about, and that's why I broke it down pre-2020, after 2020. If you're a pre-2020 beneficiary of someone who died pre-2020, you're just following the old rules. The 10-year regime doesn't apply to you, and this relief for RMD doesn't really apply to you. You may have gotten relief in 2020 and 21 from COVID, but this specific notice does not apply to you because you're not in the 10-year regime and there's no controversy to you. You know what your life expectancy is and you know what you have to take. So you don't get the reprieve, okay? If you are the EDB and you get the 10 years, if you chose the 10-year versus the life expectancy, then you will get the relief this year and you don't have to take RMDs if you don't want it. Okay, so if you are not an EDB, you're stuck in the 10 years and you get relief, right? That means you're a non-spousal beneficiary, someone who died after 2020, you don't satisfy the EDB, you're greater than 10 years younger, you're not chronically ill or disabled, you're not the spouse, you have to do 10 years, but you do get relief this year, just like you got relief last year. If you are an EDB and you chose the life expectancy, this relief doesn't apply to you, okay? So this is the controversy, as I talked about in the opening of today's video. It's a simple choice. Do you want people to have to take the money out over 10 years? So a little bit, let's say it's $100, $10 each year over 10 years. or will you let them take out the $100 after year 10? So it's the IRA in both cases will be depleted to zero. It's just how do you extract the money? Do you do it periodically, pro rata, or you just wait to the end and do it? Not a very tough choice. I have no idea why the IRS can't make this decision. They claim they're still reviewing the public comments. The problem is the Secure Act, when it was drafted, seemed to give the individual the choice. And I think what happened is when the IRS issued regulations, they kind of muddied the waters a little bit and basically reverted back to the idea that, or maybe created a new idea that it has to be over 10 years, which ran in counter to what the Secure Act language said in 2019. And now they're still in limbo and no one can make a decision. So it's, I guess, okay for anyone who is a designated beneficiary. A non-spousal beneficiary is someone who passed away after 2020. They would have to take over 10 years. No one knows, can you wait to 10 years? Can you just pull out? Or do you have to pull out a little bit every year? Those folks get to have relief this year and don't have to take an RMD. But ultimately, they will have to deplete the IRA after 10 years. I assume the IRS will get their act together by next year. So you may just be delaying the inevitable of ultimately depleting the IRA through the RMD rules. Okay. So that's a little bit about IRA Financial. You know how great we are. But this is an educational video. I think the most important part is understanding, are you an EDB or not, right? Again, if you are a beneficiary of someone who died before 2020, you're going to keep doing what you're doing. Nothing's changed. You don't get any relief. You're under life expectancy. If you are the beneficiary of someone who died after 2020, if you're an EDB, an eligible designated beneficiary, you're a spouse, someone who's a minor, a disabled, chronically ill, or someone who's not more than 10 years younger, you choose life expectancy or 10 years. If you chose life expectancy, no relief because you're in a different regime. If you chose 10 years, then you'll get relief in 2024, but ultimately you're going to have to make up for lost time going forward. Now, if you chose the life expectancy as an EDB, then again, you can ignore. Now, if you are a designated beneficiary because you're not an EDB, basically your grandma passed and you're more than 10 years younger, 20, 30, 40, 50 years younger, and you're not an EDB, you're not a spouse, you're not a minor, you're not disabled or chronically ill, you have to take 10 years. But I guess the good part is you don't have to take an RMD this year, just like you didn't have to take last year because of this controversy that the IRS can't figure out. Should we let you take it out over 10 years or should you be able to have the choice when you pull out? That's it. That's our beautiful government. And that's how the requirement and distribution rules work. So I spent a lot of time on this PowerPoint and you feel free to use it. This has caused a lot of controversy amongst tax practitioners because the requirement and distribution rules were fairly easy to work before Secure Act, before 2020. And then they try to simplify it with this 10-year rule, which should have been easy. Like I would have said, listen, anyone who dies after 2020, you just have 10 years to pull it out. Maybe you give the EDB the exception, fine. If you're a spouse or disabled, minor, chronic. Sorry, I think I lost connection for a second. But anyways, I'm going to wrap up. But that's just bottom line is it didn't have to be this complicated. It's pretty simple. And unfortunately, the government just made things more complicated. But I hope this video, I try to keep it under 30 minutes, should explain to you everything you need to know about the requirement of distribution rules, how they work prior to 2020, how they work now. Are you an EDB? Are you a regular designated beneficiary? Does this relief apply to you or not? And what do you have to do? So that's it for today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope I simplified and made things as easy as possible for the RMD rules, which are a little bit complex, even though they don't have to be. Have a great weekend. Thanks for watching.